The weight of loneliness sat on Sarah's chest like a stone as she stared out her apartment window on New Year's Eve. Below, the city pulsed with life and celebration, fireworks painting the sky in brilliant colors while strangers embraced and laughed in the streets. Up here on the 21st floor, her world was silent except for the hum of her ancient heater and the occasional rustle from Charlie, her struggling succulent plant that seemed determined to die despite her best efforts. Sarah had bought Charlie 3 months ago in a moment of optimism, convinced that caring for something green might fill the emptiness that echoed through her studio apartment. Now most of his leaves were shriveled and brown, a perfect reflection of her own inability to thrive in this concrete jungle. She was 26 years old, spending the biggest celebration of the year alone with a dying plant and a mug of chamomile tea that had gone cold an hour ago. Her internal voice, that cruel companion she'd lived with since childhood, whispered its familiar refrain. What did you think would happen? That people would suddenly want to befriend the awkward African girl with no family and the social skills of a frightened rabbit? She'd moved to Seoul 2 years ago for work, and while she'd mastered the language and the subway system, making genuine connections remained an impossible puzzle she couldn't solve. Work was different. At the office as executive assistant to Park Ji-hoon, the brilliant and intimidating CEO of a major import-export company with whispered connections to more shadowy enterprises, Sarah knew exactly who she was. She was competent, efficient, indispensable. She anticipated his needs before he voiced them, managed his impossible calendar with military precision, and maintained the perfect professional distance. Ji-hoon was extraordinary in ways that both intimidated and fascinated her. He was sharp-minded, intense, and carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who'd never had to raise his voice to be obeyed. But sometimes, when she brought him his afternoon coffee, she'd catch him gazing out his floor-to-ceiling windows with an expression she recognized because she saw it in her own reflection every morning. The face of someone profoundly, achingly alone. But that was at the office. Here, in her beige shoebox apartment, she was just Sarah. A young woman whose grand plans for New Year's Eve consisted of watching the countdown on a grainy stream and being asleep by 12:30. The pathetic reality of it almost made her laugh. She pulled her blanket tighter and glanced at Charlie. "Well, little guy," she murmured to the succulent, "looks like it's just us again." The silence that followed felt heavier than usual. The knock at 11:56 p.m. shattered that silence like glass. Sarah's heart lurched into her throat. Nobody knocked on her door. Ever. Packages were left in the lobby, maintenance had keys for emergencies, and she had no friends who would drop by unannounced. Her mind, shaped by years of caution as an orphan navigating unfamiliar systems, immediately conjured worst-case scenarios. She crept toward the door, her socked feet silent on the cheap flooring, and peered through the peephole. What she saw made her certain she was hallucinating. Standing in her dingy hallway, looking directly at her door as if he could see through it, was Park Ji-hoon. Not the crisp, suited CEO she saw at the office, but a different version. He wore dark jeans and a charcoal turtleneck under a wool coat, his usually perfectly styled hair slightly windswept, a shadow of stubble on his jaw. He looked less like the untouchable executive and more like an actual person. A devastatingly handsome, completely unexpected person standing outside her door 2 minutes before midnight. Sarah backed away from the peephole, her pulse hammering. What was he doing here? Had she made some terrible mistake with his schedule? Forgotten something crucial? He knocked again, 3 firm raps that seemed to echo through her bones. "Miss Adeyemi," his voice came through the door, that familiar deep tone that she usually heard barking instructions on conference calls, now strangely gentle. "It's Ji-hoon. I know you're home." Panic and confusion warred in her chest. She couldn't ignore him. He was her boss. With trembling fingers, she unlocked the deadbolt and cracked open the door. "Mr. Park?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Is something wrong?" His dark eyes swept past her, taking in the sparse apartment visible through the gap, the single mug on her coffee table, the wilting Charlie in the corner, before returning to her face with an expression she couldn't read. "May I come in?" It wasn't really a request. Sarah opened the door wider, stepping aside in a daze as he moved past her. His presence filled her small space instantly, bringing with him the scent of cold night air and the subtle, expensive cologne that always lingered in his office. He turned to face her, and for the first time since she'd started working for him, she saw something uncertain in his usually unreadable expression. He held up a large paper bag. "I brought tekguk," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "It's traditional for the new year." Sarah stared at the bag, then at his face, her brain struggling to process the surreal scene unfolding in her living room. Park Ji-hoon, the man who made business rivals tremble, was standing in her apartment holding New Year's soup. I don't understand," she stammered. His gaze held hers. "I was reviewing files at the office when I remembered you mentioning you had no plans for tonight." He paused, and something vulnerable flickered across his face. "I also know you live alone." The words landed like a physical touch. He'd noticed. Amid all his high-stakes negotiations and million-dollar deals, he'd paid enough attention to her quiet existence to know she'd be spending tonight by herself. The realization was both mortifying and deeply, painfully moving. In Korean culture, it's considered unlucky to begin the new year in solitude, he continued, moving toward her tiny kitchen as if he'd been there 100 times before. And eating this soup signifies growing a year older together with those who matter. He began unpacking the bag, revealing containers of steaming broth, rice cakes shaped like coins, thin strips of egg, and small bowls of garnishes. The rich aroma of beef broth and sesame filled the air, replacing the stale emptiness with warmth and life. The digital clock on her microwave blinked to 12 o'clock. Outside, the city erupted in celebration, fireworks exploding in showers of light, distant cheers rising like a wave. He paused, looking back at her over his shoulder. "Happy New Year, Sarah," he said, using her first name for the first time ever, and the sound of it in his voice created something entirely new between them. "Happy New Year, Mr. Park," she whispered back. He gestured to her small table, the one she usually just piled with unopened mail. "Please sit. And call me Ji-hoon. We're not in the office." Sarah sat down slowly, watching in amazement as he efficiently prepared their meal. He explained in that low, measured voice that the round rice cakes symbolized prosperity, that eating the soup together marked the passage into a new year, that his grandmother made this every year and had insisted he bring extra. It was the most surreal moment of her entire life. Here was this powerful man, someone who commanded rooms full of executives without effort, carefully arranging a traditional meal for her in her cramped apartment. The initial shock began to dissolve, replaced by something fragile and warm that she was afraid to name. As they ate, the silence between them felt natural rather than awkward, broken only by the gentle clink of spoons against bowls. The soup was incredible. Rich, nourishing, tasting like comfort and home, concepts Sarah had only ever imagined. "This is amazing," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. He looked up, and a genuine smile transformed his entire face, softening the sharp angles and making him look younger, more open. "My grandmother's recipe. She makes enough to feed half of Seoul every year." And, just like that, the walls came down. He began talking about his family, not in great detail, but in small sketches. A boisterous household, a grandmother who ruled through love and food, siblings who fought and laughed in equal measure. It was a universe so completely foreign to Sarah's experience that she could only listen, captivated. When he asked about her family, the familiar knot formed in her stomach. This was always the question she dreaded. "I don't have one," she said quietly but firmly. "I grew up in group homes back in Nigeria, then came here on a scholarship." She braced herself for the pity, the uncomfortable sympathy that usually followed this revelation. But Ji-hoon simply nodded slowly, his dark eyes holding hers with profound understanding. "So you know what it means to be truly alone," he said. Not a question. A recognition of shared territory. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt seen. Not as the efficient assistant or the orphan girl or the foreigner, but simply as herself. The soup bowl sat empty, but neither of them moved to clear the table. The conversation flowed more easily now, as if that moment of mutual recognition had unlocked something neither had known they were guarding. He was surprisingly easy to talk to when he wasn't issuing directives or reviewing contracts. He had a stillness about him, a capacity for listening that made her feel heard in a way she'd never experienced. She found herself telling him about the succession of temporary homes, the constant feeling of not quite belonging anywhere, the fierce self-reliance she'd developed as armor against a world that kept proving itself indifferent. He never interrupted, his attention focused entirely on her, serious and present. In exchange, he shared pieces of his own story that painted a picture of crushing expectations and inherited burden. He spoke of the weight of family legacy, the isolating nature of leadership, the strange loneliness of being surrounded by people who saw only your position, never your person. He admitted that holiday celebrations often felt suffocating, that he sometimes preferred the structured quiet of his empty office to the demands of forced festivity. "My family is a lot," he said with a wry smile. "They love intensely, but they're also overwhelming. Sometimes silence is the only place I can find peace." As he spoke, Sarah saw past the CEO facade to the man beneath. Someone who, like her, observed life from the outside, who understood the paradox of solitude, both its comfort and its ache. The clock crept past 2 a.m, the world outside having settled into the quiet hours between celebration and dawn. The night felt suspended, a small pocket of warmth and genuine connection that Sarah desperately wished would never end. Jihoon reached for his phone, and her heart sank. "I should let you rest," he said, though everything about his tone suggested he wanted to stay. Then he paused, his eyes meeting hers with that same direct intensity. "The New Year celebrations continue tomorrow with my family. A big dinner. Everyone will be there." He took a breath. "I want you to come. As my guest?" The invitation hung in the air between them, monumental and terrifying. Go to his family dinner? Her, the socially awkward foreigner? Meet the large, boisterous family he'd just described? Panic flared hot and immediate in her chest. "Oh, I couldn't," she said quickly, her hands fidgeting with the edge of the blanket still draped around her shoulders. "I wouldn't want to intrude." "You wouldn't be intruding," he said calmly, with absolute certainty. "I'm inviting you. I want you there." He must have seen the fear in her eyes, the instinct to retreat. "Sarah," he said, his voice gentle, "you don't have to be alone anymore." The words struck something deep inside her, a longing so profound she'd buried it beneath layers of self-protection. It was a simple promise, an offer of belonging that felt too precious to be real. She looked at this complicated, surprising man who had appeared at her door and dismantled her loneliness piece by careful piece. And for the first time in years, she chose to be brave. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll come." The smile that spread across his face was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Sarah woke the next morning to a world that felt fundamentally different. The gray light filtering through her window seemed less oppressive, the silence less like a weight and more like a breath before something new. The lingering scent of sesame and beef broth reminded her that last night had actually happened, that it wasn't some elaborate dream conjured by loneliness. Her mind replayed everything in vivid detail. The impossible knock, Jihoon in her doorway, the shared meal, the quiet confessions, and finally that terrifying invitation. Panic tried to claw its way up her throat. What had she been thinking? She was Sarah Adeyemi, a woman whose most successful social interaction in the past 6 months had been a pleasant exchange with her building's security guard. She owned exactly one dress appropriate for meeting anyone's family, a simple navy wrap dress that screamed competent professional, not potential romantic interest. She imagined a house full of elegant Koreans, all silently judging her second-hand shoes and her fumbling attempts at cultural etiquette. They'd see right through her. They'd know she didn't belong. She was reaching for her phone to cancel when a text message lit up the screen. From Jihoon. "Good morning. I'll pick you up at 3 p.m. Don't eat lunch. My mother will be personally offended if you arrive anything less than starving." The message was so matter-of-fact, so confident in her attendance, that it short-circuited her anxiety spiral. He wasn't giving her an escape route. He expected her. He wanted her there. She typed back a simple okay, and the decision solidified. The hours before 3 were a blur of frantic preparation. She showered, twisted her hair into an elegant updo, applied makeup with more care than she had in months, and put on the navy dress, studying her reflection with critical uncertainty. Was this right? Was she right? At exactly 3 p.m., another text arrived. I'm downstairs. When Sarah stepped out of her building, Ji-hun was leaning against a sleek black car that looked wildly out of place on her modest street. He wore tailored slacks and a cashmere sweater under a long coat, every inch the powerful executive, but his eyes when they met hers were warm and reassuring. He opened the passenger door for her, his hand gently guiding her elbow, and the simple gesture sent butterflies swirling through her stomach. The drive passed in comfortable silence, though Sarah's nerves hummed like live wires beneath her skin. He seemed to sense her anxiety because halfway through the journey, he reached over and briefly squeezed her hand. They're going to love you, he said with quiet certainty. Just be yourself. The advice, while kind, was terrifying. Being herself had always resulted in being alone. As they pulled into the driveway of a beautiful home glowing with light and alive with sound, her heart began racing. This was really happening. The front door opened before they reached it, and a whirlwind of warmth, noise, and incredible smells poured out. A petite older woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and Ji-hun's same determined jawline stood in the doorway, wiping her hands on an apron. You're late, she announced to her son, her tone stern but her eyes dancing. Then she turned that penetrating gaze to Sarah, a look so thorough and assessing that Sarah felt completely transparent. And you, the woman said, her voice softening. You're too thin. Come. We must feed you properly. Mrs. Park had spoken. Sarah had arrived. The Kim home was chaos incarnate, but chaos filled with love. Every surface overflowed with either food or family photographs, and the air vibrated with overlapping conversations, laughter, and a television blaring a variety show from somewhere deeper in the house. People seemed to be everywhere, aunts, uncles, cousins, siblings, all radiating the same vibrant energy. Sarah was immediately swept into the current, introduced to a dizzying parade of faces whose names evaporated from her memory the moment she heard them. Ji-hun stayed close, his hand a constant, grounding presence at the small of her back, his voice a low murmur in her ear providing context. That's my sister Minji. Never tell her a secret. That's my uncle. He'll debate you about everything. Just smile and nod. And that, he gestured toward a serene elderly woman sitting in a comfortable chair observing the chaos with knowing eyes, is my Halmoni, my grandmother. She's the real authority here. They were finally seated at a massive table groaning under the weight of at least 15 different dishes. Bowls of japchae, platters of galbi, colorful arrangements of banchan, and a huge pot of galbit-jeem were passed around with chaotic efficiency. The family ate with the same noisy enthusiasm they brought to everything else. The interrogation began almost immediately. Questions came from all directions, rapid fire between bites of food. So you work for my grandson? Halmoni asked, her voice gravelly but clear. Yes, Sarah managed, her voice barely audible. For 2 years. Is he a good boss, or is he as grumpy at work as he is at home? Minji chimed in with a mischievous grin, earning a sharp look from Ji-hun. She has to say yes, or she'll lose her job, and Uncle shouted from down the table, triggering a wave of laughter. Sarah felt her cheeks burn, a deer caught in the brightest, most loving headlights imaginable. She felt Ji-hun's leg press against hers under the table, a silent message of support. She took a breath. He's demanding, she said carefully. But he's fair. And brilliant at what he does. The table went quiet. Every eye focused on her. Halmoni studied her face for a long moment, then a slow, pleased smile crossed her wrinkled features. She nodded once, decisively. Good answer, she declared. She's smart, Ji-hun. And she has honest eyes. Don't ruin this. And, just like that, the verdict was in. Halmoni had spoken. Sarah was no longer just a guest. She was a person who mattered. After the whirlwind of dinner, as the family began clearing the mountain of dishes with the same cheerful chaos, they approached everything, Ji-hun leaned close to her. "Come with me," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. He took her hand, his fingers threading through hers in a way that felt both new and inevitable, and led her through a sliding door at the back of the house into a peaceful, snow-dusted garden. The sudden quiet was a balm to her overstimulated senses. The cold night air was crisp and clean, the only sounds the distant hum of the city and the soft crunch of their footsteps on the stone path. The garden was exquisitely designed, with stone lanterns and elegantly shaped dormant trees, creating a pocket of perfect tranquility amid the chaos they'd just left. They walked in silence for a moment, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Then Ji-hun stopped, turning to face her fully. The moonlight caught his features, highlighting the sharp line of his jaw, the intensity in his dark eyes. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice low and serious. "And I need you to listen before you respond." Sarah's heart stuttered, but she nodded. "I didn't show up at your apartment last night because I felt sorry for you," he began. "I came because over the past 2 years, I've watched you." Not in a strange way, he added quickly, seeing her expression. "But I've noticed you. Your dedication, your intelligence, the way you handle everything I throw at you with grace. The way you're kind to people even when you think no one's watching." He took a breath. "I've also noticed your loneliness because I recognize it. I see it every day in the mirror. Despite being surrounded by family and colleagues and business partners, I'm fundamentally alone in the ways that matter." His hand tightened around hers. "When I realized you'd be spending New Year's Eve by yourself, I couldn't stand it. Not because I pitied you, but because I wanted to be with you. Because somehow, in all this chaos," he gestured back toward the house, "you're the only person who makes me feel less alone." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "Ji-hun, I know this is complicated," he continued. "I'm your boss, and that creates problems we'll need to navigate carefully. But I also know that what I feel for you is real. And I hope, you might feel something too." The vulnerability in his eyes, this powerful man laying himself bare in a moonlit garden, was the bravest thing Sarah had ever witnessed. "I do," she whispered. "Feel something. I've been trying not to because it seemed impossible. You're you, and I'm just." "Don't," he said firmly. "Don't diminish yourself. You're extraordinary, Sarah. You've built a life in a foreign country, learned a new language, excelled in a demanding job, all while carrying loneliness that would have broken someone weaker. You're the strongest person I know." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes. No one had ever seen her this way. No one had ever made her feel this valuable. "My family adores you already," he continued with a soft smile. "My grandmother's approval is nearly impossible to earn, and she gave it in under 2 hours. Minji texted me in the kitchen that if I don't pursue you, she'll disown me." Sarah laughed through her tears. "What happens now?" "Now," Ji-hun said, stepping closer, his free hand coming up to gently cup her face, "we take this one day at a time. We'll handle the work situation properly. Maybe you'll transfer to a different department, or maybe I'll step back from day-to-day operations. We'll figure it out together because I'm not willing to let you go." "Together," Sarah repeated, testing the word. It felt foreign and wonderful on her tongue. "Together," he confirmed. Then, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, he slowly leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. Sarah's free hand came up to rest against his chest, feeling his heartbeat racing as fast as her own. When they pulled apart, both slightly breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Happy New Year, Sarah Adeyemi," he whispered. "Happy New Year, Park Ji-hun," she whispered back. From inside the house, someone called Ji-hun's name, laughter and music spilling out into the garden. He sighed, but his smile was radiant. "Ready to go back in?" he asked. Sarah looked back at the glowing house, full of warmth and family and noise, everything she'd never had but always craved. Then she looked at the man beside her, who'd shown up at her door when she'd needed someone most, who'd seen past her defenses to the person underneath. "Yes," she said, squeezing his hand. "I'm ready." They walked back toward the house together, no longer two lonely people navigating the world in parallel, but two people who'd found each other in the vast silence and decided to build something new. The future was uncertain, filled with complications they'd need to address and challenges they'd need to overcome. But for the first time in her life, Sarah wasn't facing it alone. And that made all the difference. If you enjoyed this story of unexpected connection and finding family in the most surprising places, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Drop a heart emoji if you believe in second chances and new beginnings. Trust me, you won't want to miss the next story. See you in the next video.